morning. Welcome to what hopefully is an interesting beginning to discourse on delimitation, which I believe is an existential crisis that the Indian Union faces. So I've been told that Professor Gowda has an engagement, so we will begin with him first. But I just want to set the context. Dr. Tharoor mentioned some of this, but I just want to make sure that all of us understand why it is that I call this an existential crisis that India faces, right? Many of us are too young to remember, or many of us were not born back then, unlike some of my panelists, I guess. But the point is that, in the late 60s and early 70s, the situation in India was dire in that its food production was still stuck in the 19th century. Its yields were pathetic. And its population, given the medical advances of the 20th century, was sort of exploding, right? And it's a good thing because maternal mortality and infant mortality in that time sort of started coming down, which resulted in this population explosion, but we did not have sufficient food grain to feed our population, and we depended on American aid to sustain ourselves, right? And so the governments of the day were in a bind. What do? So they wanted to attack both the supply side and the demand side. In terms of the supply side, we now know that by the name Green Revolution, depending on your how much of organic food you consume, you might agree or disagree with that, but the fact is that, it helped us sort of not depend on American aid. But more importantly, we also wanted fewer mouths to feed with time. And the way in which they wanted to do that was through population control. And given that we are a democracy and we were in China, we couldn't impose a one-child policy despite what Sanjay Gandhi wanted to do, right? And because of that, given that we don't have the heavy-handedness of the Chinese state, and we wanted to sort of implement a gradual decline in fertility, if not a population decline itself, the way to achieve that ended up depending on states, right? Because the union government has very little wherewithal to actually implement family planning, right? Regardless of what it thinks, and regardless of whether that prime minister happens to be Indira Gandhi or Narendra Modi, right? So given that states were given this responsibility of implementing this family control, and given that we did not have the draconian ideas of the Chinese state, the reasonable compromise then at that point was that we freeze the political power of states based on 1971 census, which is what Dr. Tharoor alluded to, right? So that is the 42nd Amendment. The 42nd Amendment, as the learned justice in this panel would tell you, is an extraordinarily illiberal amendment to the Constitution. However, it had this one thing, which was that it froze the political power of each state at 1971 population levels, right? Now, the reason why we did that is precisely because the government of the day, and as we now know, we all understand that different states have different abilities to implement policies, right? I'll give you a simple example. The health indicators of Kerala are comparable to the United States. It has an IMR of 6. The health indicators of Madhya Pradesh are comparable to Afghanistan. It has an IMR of 48. Now, it is not reasonable in any realm to have a single policy to govern the United States and Afghanistan, except we try to do that, right? And given this sort of obvious disparity, the government of the day decided what we will do, therefore, is sort of freeze political power and go forward, right? And that freeze was originally for 25 years, as it has already been discussed. It was extended for another 25 years. And we now have a situation where the incumbent government of the day has decided, well, enough with the freeze. Let's go find some votes in the Hindi-speaking parts of the country. So, Professor Rajeev Gowda, given that, this is the little history, where do you as a scholar and a public policy expert stand, and where do you as a person affiliated with the Congress party stand?
See, what Shashi has already articulated is a larger sentiment that has been pervading India, that the South has behaved better, performed better, especially on family planning, and we should not be penalized as a result of that. Now, that's fine, but we are not a party that does not understand that we are part of this federal equation. We need to share with others, etc. So sharing resources, contributing more taxes, all of those are not anything that we have a real issue with. If our compatriots are in need, no problem. We can do some more because we've been doing well. And we must remember that some areas, because of the freight equalization and such policies historically, which contributed so much in terms of minerals, didn't get as much reward historically. Some of the backward regions as well. So this is, but that's not the issue here. It's one of political power. And that's a very, very tricky subject. I grew up listening to stories saying nobody from South India can ever be prime minister. Okay? When Mr. Narasimha Rao became, when Shri Gowda became, we shattered that myth in some ways. But that used to be the received wisdom, that it was something that was the province of UP, basically. That was how we thought about it. And we can't have a repeat of that going forward, and a marginalization, a political marginalization of the South. So how do we address this, right? One approach, of course, is the Finance Commission's approach, right? See, as it is not one person, one vote, one value because of the size of states, etc. So in the constitution itself, when we embarked on this, if we give one MP, Lok Sabha MP to Lakshadweep, you are clearly making sure that 60, 70,000 people get to elect one MP, while in UP, 30 lakhs elect one MP. So there is that disparity already in the system that we are okay with, right? So can we now think about balancing out in some other way? So if you look at the principles that the Finance Commission includes, there's a principle of equality, which is one person, one vote equivalent, but there's also a principle of performance, there's a principle of need, all those sorts of other ideas related to population, related to forest area, related to area, related to tax, the tax effort, whole bunch of other features which they've brought in to reasonably allocate resources, right? Okay, so that's one part of it. Now, but in the process, Karnataka, speaking for Karnataka, we lost resources, and the Finance Commission wanted to give us more, which was not accepted by our MP from Karnataka, who's the Finance Minister, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman. Anyway, the point is, let's leave that aside. What are the possible compromises, right? One is something like the US Senate system, to have the Lok Sabha broadly represent population trends, but the Rajya Sabha serve as a compromise. And this, I'm not speaking for my party, I'm speaking as a scholar here, and who's studied this to some extent, right? And the compromise is you provide more seats in the Rajya Sabha to balance things out, and so you have some rough balancing. But the Rajya Sabha, I was there, John is there right now, is the weaker body. So how do you change the powers of the Rajya Sabha to ensure that this additional representation possibly is meaningful, not something just to be bypassed all the time, right? So that's one possibility. The Finance Commission's formulae adapted here could be another possibility.
Can I just
jump in, please,
and tell you a couple of quick reminders on the Finance Commission? While I agree with you that in principle what they have done is, or most lay people who probably read the first page would agree with that. But if you go into their calculations, what they have done is, for every single one of those areas that you mentioned, they've scaled it by population, which essentially renders the outcome to be indistinguishable from population itself, which is like, it's nice and fine for the Prime Minister to announce that, we will introduce a factor called demographic performance, which is what they did. But if I urge all of you to go read the 15th Finance Commission's report, right? And then what you should do is, you should basically take the 15th Finance Commission's population, it's called a factor for population, demographic performance it's called, and then do a correlation analysis with the population of each state in 2011. What you will find is there's a correlation factor of 2011's data of 0.9, and its entire purpose in life was to be the opposite effect of that, right? It was supposed to correlate closer with 1971 population and not 2011 population. Except because of what they have done, every single sort of factor has been scaled with the 2011 population. It just defeats the purpose, right? And these are, I don't know, and this has been buried in the annexures, and I don't know if some clever bureaucrat thought we won't read annexures.
Good that you caught it, because I only skimmed the surface on that. Nonetheless, the other points that I want to mention is that, echoing Shashi, that this needs to be an open, engaging consultation. The last delimitation, I also presented to it, Justice Kuldeep Singh's commission, and as a result of that, my own family's assembly seats all got reserved. I'm politically homeless, and that's why the Rajya Sabha. Okay, but the basic point is, the essential point is that this process needs to be depoliticized. It has to be something which is consensual. And so far, what I'm seeing with recent delimitations, Jammu and Kashmir, and the recent one in Assam, these are not depoliticized. These seem to have a very, very strong political agenda to marginalize minorities and cut their representation. This is not the way to go about delimitation. On the other hand, to the extent that the government seems to be willing to explore these other possibilities, I see a hint in the Prime Minister's speech a couple of days ago in Telangana, where he's criticizing Rahul Gandhi for saying, your reward according to your population, and saying this is going to affect South India's representation. I suppose you saw this statement that he made. And, so that means that the government is also thinking about a formula which is not going to be purely population-driven. What is that formula? We don't want to be surprised with some shock and awe announcement someday in Parliament or something like that. This is something that the whole country should be part of. And remember, it's not just population control, right? There's also migration that's been happening. We saw that during the first lockdown, the millions who had to march back during that first lockdown. So there is some other balancing happening as well within the country. There are, believe it or not, there are 5% of Kerala are migrants into Kerala, if I'm not mistaken, right? So there's all kinds of change going on. Anyway.
Can I
yeah,
just,
please.
The second question that I wanted to ask you was, you alluded to the American Senate. The American Senate has, I don't think most Americans are fans of their own Senate because of how it delays processes, right? So if you want the Rajya Sabha is toothless, but we don't want it to, I don't know, do we want our Rajya Sabha to be as powerful as the American Senate? It's a complicated question, right?
It is a complicated question, but if you're trying to balance out political power, then, if you're giving more seats in the Rajya Sabha, then you need to ensure that those seats mean something more than pure parliamentary representation. Because the Rajya Sabha is inherently, in the current system, weaker because of lack of, you don't need a vote of confidence in the Rajya Sabha. You don't get to vote on finance bills, these sorts of things. So this is a larger constitutional exercise. That's what I'm suggesting here. Anyway, it's good that South First is debating this. It's good that you've also raised these issues in your book. But let's do this in a constructive manner. We're not interested in creating enemies amongst our own brothers and sisters in different parts of the country. And this is something that we can work out together. That's what I'd like to say. Now, if you don't mind, if you don't have any other questions for me, I'm actually replacing Mr. Priyank Kharge on this panel. I have to be in another location at 11:30, 1 hour away. So if you don't mind, I'm going to quietly disappear. I will follow the recording of the event and gain from the wisdom of my colleagues here, Khushbu, John, and Justice Chelameswar, and of course, you as well, the audience. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're all in alliance, brother. The India Alliance.